Hey guys, so here's a little bit, a quick rundown of what we covered in class the other day. So turning to page 39 in your workbooks, you need to label the respiratory system, starting at the nose area, going down to the pharynx, then the larynx, and then the trachea. The trachea then splits into two, which ends up being your left and right bronchi, which goes down to your bronchioles. And your bronchioles are right at the end when they turn into your alveoli. Okay, on page 40 and 41, it tells you the structure and function of each area of that passageway. Now, if you can think of a tube, like a vacuum cleaner tube, that's exactly what your trachea, bronchi, and bronchioles look like. It's almost like a vacuum cleaner tube. In the vacuum cleaner tube, there are rings on there, isn't it? Now, those rings are made of cartilage, and that cartilage is strong and keeps that airway open. If that cartilage, just like your vacuum cleaner tube, gets pushed or broken or collapses, then the airway cannot get through. So that becomes quite vital and life-threatening. So those cartilages are there to protect and to hold open your windpipe. Now, in between those rings, you have smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is involuntary, okay, and that smooth muscle helps you constrict and dilates your airway passages. And then you also have three layers. You have a mucosa and submucosa. And what that helps does is trap dust as well as make it nice and smooth and warms the air. There's an adventitia layer around the outside because on the back of your trachea, attached to it, but very, very separately, is your esophagus. And your esophagus is where your food goes down. So you will notice when you read about the larynx area here, in this larynx area here, you have something called the epiglottis. Your epiglottis is a trap door, so it makes sure that no food can go down into your trachea, and that when it shuts, all the food will go down into your esophagus. Now, I want you to open up this presentation so you can watch all the video clips, which are fantastic. There's cameras going down throats, and you can fill out page 42 in your workbooks in your own words, following. Well, not in your own words, so you have to do it from the PowerPoint. But what it will do, it will help you learn how to understand how the system should work normally to help answer your questions. I'm going to go through some of the complex stuff. So just before I move on, what you will need to know is the function and structure of the pathway of the respiratory system. It's all in here. You have to open this PowerPoint presentation on the other screen so you can read it all out and watch all the YouTube clips. Okay, moving on. There are protective mechanisms. Just like you have functions in the other body systems, which you have also in here, there is also protective mechanisms. So on page 43, it asks you to fill out what these protective mechanisms are. I've got it here for you, but I'll just very quickly go over it. So mucus and mucosa, which is very similar, it's like a sticky substance that will trap any bacteria or dust or anything empty going through the nose. That also carries on all the way down into your windpipe as well. Cilia are tiny, tiny little cells with looks like little microscopic hairs on there, which also trap baddies and make sure that all those baddies, which is dust and pathogens and chemicals, get forced to the back of the throat. Now, tonsils, whether you got them or not, if you've got them, great. It's not a big deal if you haven't. They act like a filter, and that filter will hopefully trap and destroy any bacteria that's going into the lungs. Now, if you've had your main tonsils out, don't stress about that. You also have other tonsils in your mouth that do the same job. If you've had your tonsils out because they was not working anyway. Cartilage is there, like I mentioned, it keeps all the airways open. Now you have a cough reflex, which you know if you accidentally choke, your reflex is to cough to force the object out of your lungs and down and through to your esophagus, to your digestive system. So always encourage someone to cough, and I'm sure you heard that on first aid. This is the trapdoor I was talking about. It's called your epiglottis. It is found in your pharynx, and it works as a trapdoor to stop any food or any objects going down into your trachea, into your pharynx, into your trachea. All right, macrophages are found right in the alveoli, which is where all your oxygen does all the transformation. These little macrophages are beautiful little cells that constantly go around cleaning and cleaning any particles that has got into the alveolar spaces. If you remember the nervous system and all the neurogulars, we had phagocytes in there, which helped also clean around the brain, didn't we? So this is a very similar cell, but it's only found in the lungs, called a macrophage. Now, I mentioned about the smooth muscle around the windpipe and all around all the airways, and that smooth muscle is a muscle, muscularis, and it helps dilate and it also helps constrict any it wants to help you breathe if you're in an emergency or you're exercising, and it will also help you constrict if you think something's going down there that shouldn't be there, which doesn't always go away when we talk about asthma and so forth. Okie dokie. Why do we breathe and how do we breathe? So inspiration and inhalation are very, very similar words, and they basically mean breathing in. Now, when you breathe in, at the present, straight away, what makes you breathe in is because your lungs are all collapsed, so to speak. Once they collapse or they're squashed, like squashing a balloon, all the air has come out. Now, we call atmosphere, I hope you know what the word atmosphere and atmospheric pressure is. If you don't, pause now, find out what that means before you go on, okay? So once your lungs deflate and all the air has come out of your lungs, the atmospheric pressure, which is the pressure on the outside of your body, is actually higher. Okay, so what it's saying now is the pressure inside the lungs is low and the pressure outside in the atmosphere is high. What happens naturally then is because it's higher, anything in the higher atmosphere gets drawn into a low pressure, gets sucked in like a vacuum, whether you like it or not. So it forces you to inhale because of the pressure between the outside and the inside. As it forces you to inhale, as you are inhaling by the use of your respiratory muscles contracting, your respiratory muscles are your intercostal and external costal muscles, and your diaphragm contract, which makes your lungs open up. As they open up, they causes a vacuum of the air on the outside to go into your lungs. As that air gets drawn, that is you going, as that air gets drawn into your lungs, as you know, all around your lungs, there are millions and millions of capillary blood vessels. As that air gets drawn in, all the iron on your red blood vessels attract the oxygen out of that air that you have drawn in and takes it back to your heart. The rest of the air that is not needed and the waste oxygen that has come out of the capillaries, then all your muscles relaxes, which squeezes your lungs and forces the air out of your mouth, because what is happening is the exchange. Okay, your air got too high in your lungs, the pressure got too high in your lungs once you've breathed out, so then it has to say, oh, I need to get out of here because the atmospheric pressure is lower. So it's the same thing. It's your lungs then deflate and the pressure gets forced out of your mouth. So you have a little read of that. Have a watch some of the YouTube clips. Think of that atmospheric pressure and how basically if there's a high pressure in one place, it needs to find a lower pressure. It's automatic and it has to work that way. Here's a nice little YouTube clip that is called pulmonary ventilation. Watch that over and over again and it will make a lot of sense. Okay, we don't need to know this. This is a bit of fun. So just so you know, we've talked about the nervous system and we talked about involuntary and voluntary receptors, somatic and autonomic pathways. Now, internally, you have an autonomic pathway, whereas some of your chemical receptors, which are your nerve endings, your dendrites sit on top of your heart on a place called your aorta, which you will have learned. And it sits there and they pick up chemical factors that are going around your blood. The chemical factors that they only really want to concentrate is the amount of oxygen in your blood and the amount of CO2. Now, just remember, CO2, carbon dioxide, is the waste. When all your body and all your muscles and all your cells have used up that oxygen, they actually provide and give up a waste. It's like I said, if you're eating a pie, beautiful pie, you needed that for your energy, but now you have that plastic wrapper it came in. That's the waste that you have to get rid of. The same as what your body does. So these little dendrites are picking up the levels of oxygen and CO2. They're not too worried about oxygen. They're just like, sweet, more oxygen, the better. You can't really have too much oxygen. Well, you can, but it's very hard to. But what they do, they will pick up if the CO2 is high. As the blood pumps out of the heart in the main aorta, these dendrites, these chemical receptors are saying, might pick up, oh, why have I got a lot of waste going around in the body and not as much oxygen? But mainly, why is this waste not being breathed out? Why is this person not letting the waste get out of the blood into the lungs and breathing out into the atmosphere? When they pick up that there's too much waste going around in the body, it will send a signal to the brain, and the brain will trigger an involuntary signal to your respiratory muscles to say, hey, we need to get rid of all of this waste that's going around in the blood. To get rid of that, you have to make this person breathe. You have to make them breathe out to get rid of the CO2, or you have to make them breathe in to get in the oxygen. So involuntary signals will get sent to your intercostal muscles in your rib cage and your diaphragm, which is anchored onto the bottom part of your lungs. This involuntary signal will make those muscles contract, which will force you to breathe in. And that is a survival mode. That then, what happens is your brain has overridden your voluntary muscles and made them involuntary muscles to survive. It doesn't think about the environment that it's in. Here it is explained in a lot more depth, which is very interesting. Please open up this PowerPoint so you can look at all of the YouTube clips, but also don't look into the sums and the equations. We are only looking at how it works. This is the sort of thing that you need to possibly put on in a couple of sentences when I ask you, how does the respiratory system works? Here's asthma, a great little clip on asthma, and here's a great little clip on pneumonia. You need to open up the presentation on its own so you can watch all these clips. Please take your time. So for an example, if it asks you about how the respiratory system works in homeostasis, you want to talk about the pathway. You want to talk about a pathway in order. You want to talk about the protective mechanisms which help the breathing system work normally. And then you may want to talk about how the atmospheric pressure is always higher. So then the lungs inhale it in, then the atmospheric pressure becomes higher on the inside of your lungs, so it forces you to breathe out. And then you could mention about your survival techniques and how the chemoreceptors sit on top of the aorta and pick up if there's too much CO2 in the blood that forces the person to breathe. That will give you a really in-depth high mark. Brilliant. And then you need to research asthma. Where is it happening? It's actually happening in the pathways. And if it's happening in the pathways, it's causing them to constrict. It's causing them to produce more mucus. The body thinks that it's under attack, so more mucus is produced. The blood vessels, the smooth muscles are constricting, which then causes less space for the airflow to get in and out. I want you to research up on that. And then pneumonia is about the bacteria in the alveoli sacs. And if there's pus and fluid building in those alveoli sacs, oxygen cannot exchange and carbon dioxide can't get out. Please do your research, and top marks to all of you.